Welcome in to CBS News 24/7. I'm Mugo Geek, where we begin with a look inside the White House right now, where Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt is expected to step to the podium shortly and give an update. Leavitt is likely to get questions about this Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. We continue to follow the story of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled the government needs to facilitate his return to the United States. Still, the Trump administration says that's out of their hands. And the president of El Salvador says he's not releasing him. An update in his case is just hours away from now. Here's the backstory to all of this. Back in 2019, a U.S. judge ruled Abrego Garcia could stay in the U.S. due to fear that going back to El Salvador could put his life in danger. But the Trump administration deported him anyway. His wife is now accusing the administration of playing political games with her husband's life, and she wants him back home in Maryland. We start there with CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand. Natalie, who is responsible to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back home to the United States? Who is?
Hi, Mugo. Well, yesterday inside the Oval Office, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, said that it's up to El Salvador to release Abrego Garcia, and that if El Salvador does that, then the U.S. would facilitate providing a plane. This follows that Supreme Court ruling that the administration should facilitate his release from that maximum security prison in El Salvador. And the federal judge in Maryland that will oversee this hearing later this afternoon wants to know what the administration has done, what steps have been taken to try to further that goal or the ruling by the court that he should be returned home. Now, the Trump administration and other officials, including immigration advisor Stephen Miller, they argue that Abrego Garcia is a member of the MS-13 gang. The administration has cited allegations from a confidential informant, but that's something that his family, his attorney disputes. And as you referenced, there's this prior ruling from 2019 that says he could not be returned to his home country out of fear for his safety. So a lot to continue to flesh out in court. All eyes will be on this hearing in just a few hours.
Yeah, Natalie, and sticking with that Oval Office meeting between President Trump and President Bukele, there was a hot mic moment that took place before that meeting got underway. So we're going to listen to it and then get your take on the other side.
Homegrowns are next. The homegrowns built. You got to build about 5 more places.
Yeah, that's big.
All right. It's not big enough.
So, Natalie, you heard that there. Is that even constitutional in the first place?
Well, what the president was talking about there in that hot mic moment, and then later publicly in front of the larger group of reporters, was this idea that the administration is looking at or considering sending U.S. citizens convicted of violent crimes to prisons in El Salvador. He said that the Attorney General is looking into this, but many legal experts, former judges saying that this would not be legal, that it would be unconstitutional. They point to the 8th Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Mugo.
And Natalie, while we have you here, you have some report. This is about China halting the delivery of Boeing jets. What more do we know about this action from China?
Well, this was a Bloomberg report that CBS News is still looking into. However, it is notable that President Trump referenced this report in a social media post, a longer post talking about farmers impacted by the trade war. But later in that post, he seems to confirm the report, saying that China has ordered its airlines to stop accepting deliveries of Boeing as part of this escalating trade war. The president writing that China just reneged on a big Boeing deal, saying that they will not take possession of fully committed aircraft. Now, Mugo, as you know, we've been talking about for days now, this escalating trade war between the world's two largest economies. China has put a 125% tariff on U.S. goods. So when you think about that, that would more than double the cost of a high-cost item like a Boeing airplane. Bloomberg reporting that Boeing was scheduled to send about 10 737 MAX aircraft to Chinese carriers. It's important to note that Boeing has declined to comment at this point, and we have not had an official statement from the White House or the Chinese government. Mugo.
Okay, Natalie Brand, a very windy day outside the White House there. Thank you for joining us on 24/7. And for more on the Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador, let's bring in CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez. Camilo, lawmakers are now calling for Abrego Garcia's release. What is the likelihood that President Nayib Bukele will actually meet with them to discuss this?
Well, Mugo, it is simply unclear. It is also unclear whether Salvadorian officials will allow U.S. lawmakers inside of Secot. That is, of course, the notorious and infamous mega prison in El Salvador where Kilmar Abrego Garcia and other U.S. deportees are being held and detained in. And it is also very much unclear whether the Salvadorian government will take any steps to try to, one, release Mr. Abrego Garcia from that Secot prison, and two, to facilitate his re-entry and return into the U.S. and on American soil. After all, President Bukele, during that White House meeting with President Trump, called Mr. Abrego Garcia a terrorist, despite not citing any evidence to make that accusation, and suggested that the only way he could bring Mr. Abrego Garcia to the U.S. would be to smuggle him into the country. So clearly, both the Bukele and Trump administrations, Mugo, want to continue fighting this case in the court of public opinion, despite the fact that this administration here in the U.S. at least has conceded and admitted multiple times that it made a legal mistake here in deporting a man to a country where a judge had said he could not be removed to.
Yeah, and Camilo, you just touched on my next question there, because clearly it seems both the Trump administration and Bukele, they are standing firm on their stance into all of this and to not bringing him back to the United States. So what do we expect to come out of today's hearing?
Well, a federal judge in Maryland will now evaluate and review the Trump administration's efforts, or lack thereof, in terms of bringing back Mr. Abrego Garcia to the U.S. Just to level set for our audience here, Mugo, that judge in federal district court in Maryland has ordered the Trump administration to, quote, facilitate, unquote, Mr. Abrego Garcia's return to the U.S. But the administration has provided scant details to demonstrate that they are actually taking those steps to facilitate his entry. They are taking the position, Mugo, the legal position, that facilitate in this context merely and simply means being able to admit him into the country if the Salvadoran government makes that sovereign determination that he should be released and returned to the U.S. But of course, again, we go back to the fact that President Bukele is now saying that they have no intention of releasing this man from their custody.
Okay, we'll see what happens next. Camilo Montoya Galvez, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
A second pro-Palestinian activist, Muhsin Madawi from Columbia University, was taken into custody by ICE agents after arriving at his citizenship interview in Vermont. It comes as the Trump administration fights to deport fellow Columbia activist Mahmoud Khalil. Lilia Luciano sat down with Madawi for an exclusive interview just hours before he was arrested. Take a listen.
I want people to know that the work and the activism that we have done was centered in the energy of love. I want people to know that my compassion extended beyond the Palestinian people. My compassion is also for the Jewish people and for the Israelis as well. The accusation that the Palestinian cause and the pro-Palestine movement at Columbia was anti-Semitic is a false accusation.
CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano spoke with our very own Vlad Dutier today for an update on where Madawi is now. So here's just some of that conversation.
Well, Lilia, first of all, remarkable circumstances that you actually were able to speak to him. You didn't know that he was going to be detained. Just 24 hours later, he was.
Well, he was a protester. He gave a 60 Minutes interview in late 2023, which kind of, in a way, was used to target him and accuse him of being anti-Semitic. He said everything had been taken out of context. There's these groups online that have been assembling lists and giving them to the government. And one of those groups, Beitar, told us, CBS News, in an email that he was next. And as you said, he is a permanent legal resident of the United States for more than 5 years. When Mahmoud Khalil was detained, arrested, he feared for his safety. He had also been enduring threats online and in person, so he went into hiding to figure out his next steps. I asked him, would you like to do an interview in the event that you're detained? And he said, well, there's a date coming up. Let's talk this day. And we showed up, and sure enough, at this, what he thought was, or what he was told would be taking the test to become a citizen, group of ICE agents showed up. And
so that test was entrapment. It wasn't a real test.
I'm not an attorney, but he went into the building for the interview. The interview started. The attorneys told us, okay, the interview has begun. We noticed that there were people outside, that there were friends of his who were there standing by, but there were also very clearly, I noticed at least a couple of agents, and there were some cars roaming. And suddenly we got a text minutes after the interview began from his attorney saying he's in handcuffs. And he was taken out by Homeland Security investigation agents and just a whole group of agents who were masked, who showed up, arrested him. And, you've probably seen the videos that his friend Christopher took. We unfortunately were on the other door by the time we came in.
This is the video you're talking about.
That's the video we're talking about. By the time I showed up, and you'll see videos of me driving in, we saw this, all of these cars. There were multiple trucks taking him away. His attorney told us that they were told by the federal agents very little, but that he would be charged with the same provision as Mahmoud Khalil.
So this 18th century law that is being used to detain these individuals.
Basically, the requirement is that the Secretary of State himself has to declare you, without us, at least in the Khalil case for sure, seeing any evidence of crimes, of hate speech, of anything of that nature. It just says that if the Secretary of State himself declares you to be not aligned with the foreign policy of the United States, you could lose, your green card. But these are both, or rather your visa, these are both U.S. citizens, so they could order him to be deported.
The Trump administration is taking action after Harvard University refused to comply with a list of demands. The White House is now freezing over $2 billion in federal grants to the university. CBS News Boston is on top of the story. Let's listen into their coverage from just a moment ago.
I think so many of us want to work at a place and be part of a community that stands up for its principles, right?
Harvard political science professor Ryan Eno says there's reason to celebrate, even as the university faces a $2.2 billion federal funding freeze from the Trump administration.
If you don't have that, you don't have anything.
The White House higher ed battle stems from the pro-Palestinian encampments that grew at Harvard and elsewhere last year. Last week, the Trump administration's anti-Semitism task force asked the university to implement broad reforms like changes to admissions policies, an audit of diversity on campus, and to stop recognizing some student clubs. Harvard's response? A flat no, saying it threatens the university's independence and constitutional rights. Then the government pulled the funds, dealing a blow to Harvard's research budget.
It's not just that things have been stopped cold, which a lot of it has, like one day they're doing research and then the next day they can't. It's also the fact that they can't plan.
Harvard Medical School, for example, said federal funds enabled innovations in cancer immunotherapy, treatments for diabetes and obesity, therapies for autoimmune diseases, and the first gene editing therapy for sickle cell disease and more.
Harvard is trying to, have its cake and eat it too.
But Shabbos Kestenbaum, who got his master's degree from Harvard and campaigned for President Trump, says this sort of penalty on the university is long overdue.
And what the federal government is doing is saying you have a track record of discrimination. You have a track record of violating the civil rights of your own students, and we're not going to fund this.
What would you say to people who are like, well, it's Harvard. They have a $54 billion endowment. They can handle this.
Well, look, there is some truth to that, of course. That's why it's important for Harvard to fight.
And it seems the fight is not over, as President Trump Tuesday wrote on Truth Social that he believes Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity.
You know, they were sort of digging in for battle, and we all have to be prepared to go through that now.
The government is now reviewing a full $9 billion in federal funding for Harvard. That includes $8.7 billion for future commitments for the university and major hospitals like Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Mass General, and Boston Children's. In Cambridge, Louisa Moeller, WBZ News.
Okay, a new ruling on credit card late fees, where a judge is taking action on a Biden-era regulation to reduce those fees. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. A new ruling now on credit card late fees. A federal judge just threw out a Biden-era rule capping credit card late fees at $8. The U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau had made a joint request along with a coalition of banking groups to scrap the rule, claiming that it was illegal. It had capped late fees for companies with more than 1 million open accounts unless they could prove that higher fees were necessary. It had been part of Biden's crackdown on junk fees, and it was intended to reduce the typical late fee from about $32. And former Alaska governor and vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin returned to court today for the retrial of her defamation case against the New York Times. She's getting another chance to prove to a federal jury that the Times defamed her with a 2017 editorial. It had incorrectly linked her to a 2011 mass shooting that killed 6 people and injured Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. Palin claims it damaged her reputation. The Times has acknowledged the editorial was inaccurate, but said it corrected the honest mistake. Palin was granted a new trial after another jury sided with the Times back in 2022. The man accused of setting fire to the home of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro was arraigned yesterday. The judge setting no bail. CBS News correspondent Janelle Call reports from outside the governor's mansion with the latest and what we're learning about that suspect.
Last night, for the first time, we heard from 38-year-old Cody Bomber. This is the person who police believe jumped over this fence behind me, broke into the governor's mansion, and started a fire at around 2 o'clock on Sunday morning. Last night, he appeared in court as he was walking in. His hands were cuffed, and he was escorted in by police. He was also seen sort of sticking his tongue out to reporters as he walked into court. When he got inside, the judge asked a series of questions. He said to the judge yesterday that he'd been living in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania with his parents for approximately the last year. He also said he was working as a welder, but is now unemployed. He also said, notably, that he does not suffer from any mental health issues. He said that was, quote, a rumor. That's notable because you remember in the wake of the attack, CBS News spoke to Cody Bomber's mother, and she had told our network that she did believe that her son was struggling with some mental health issues. She told us that he had been off his meds recently and that she had tried to get him help several times. She said, in fact, she tried to phone police about 4 times to no avail. Yesterday, ultimately, the judge decided not to grant Cody Bomber any bail. She said this was a decision she made in the interest of community safety. He was there, seemed sort of stone-faced as she read aloud his long list of charges against him. And he did not enter a plea yesterday, so he will now be sent back to a correctional facility until he waits for his next day in court. That will happen on April 23rd. Meantime, here outside the governor's mansion, you can see the kind of work that is currently underway. There are fire, water, and restoration crews on scene here. And you can see also there are these big steel boxes in front of the governor's mansion. What's happening here is crews are inside the house. They're bringing some of the rubble from the fire and dumping them into those boxes. This is part of the ongoing cleanup work that we'll see play out over the next several days and weeks. After that is over, then crews can come in and try to rebuild parts of the home that were destroyed. You remember those images we've been showing you the last 2 days. Some of the damage here is quite extensive, so this will be a long project ahead. Simultaneously, we're also waiting for some more answers in terms of what happened and how this happened so quickly. Police have said that the suspect had jumped over the fence, got into the home, and managed to set a fire in just a matter of minutes. So certainly some questions this hour about whether there were any security lapses that allowed this event to occur. We are waiting for those answers here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Back to you.
Chanel Call, thank you. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are crisscrossing Western states for what they're calling a fighting oligarchy tour. The two politicians were in Los Angeles over the weekend, attracting a massive crowd. And their mission for this tour, encouraging communities to fight against President Trump's policies. Today, they are in Bakersfield, California. So let's go to CBS News campaign reporter Nidia Cavazos live from Bakersfield for us. Nidia, plenty of Republicans in Bakersfield. What are we expecting Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez to talk about? And does any part of their message change from place to place? By the way, I see the big crowd behind you already right now.
Yes, so Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are making a stop today in Bakersfield, California. They've been on this tour across Western states fighting oligarchy, and today they're in Bakersfield. And like you mentioned, there are many Republicans here. This is a Republican-dominated city, and it's also located in a Republican county, Kern County. This is a county that Trump won in 2016, 2020, and 2024. But this is exactly why AOC and Bernie Sanders are here today, and it's so that they can deliver their message, a message that we've seen that they've carried across all of their tour stops. And it's that they're encouraging people, these people who are already lined up here, to fight back against what they call an oligarchy that's coming from Washington, D.C. And of course, this is referring to President Trump and his actions since taking office, and Elon Musk and his involvement in Washington, D.C. Now, it's also important to note that Kern County is a county that did make national headlines back in January because of the immigration rates that were occurring in the fields here in California. And so we do see that there are many Latinos who are present here, and we've been speaking to them, and they say that they're here to defend their workers' rights and push back against the anti-immigrant rhetoric that they've been seeing coming from Washington, D.C. in the past months.
And Nidia, I think you just told us what you're hearing from people there who are attending. Are you hearing anything else from those who are opposed to both Sanders and AOC?
Well, we are seeing that there is a very, very long line that does stem about a block away from here. But outside of this venue, we are seeing many Trump supporters who are lined up. It's a typical Trump caravan that we see that's decorated in the emblematic blue and pink flags, pro-Trump. And they're not very happy that AOC and Bernie Sanders are in their city. And again, this is a very Republican and conservative city in California.
And I'm sure that event doesn't start until later today. So the fact that you've got so many people out there already, both either for or against AOC or Bernie Sanders, is amazing to me. I want to ask you about the kind of response that they've received from the other rallies that they've held.
They've gotten a really good reaction and response, more than what was expected from what I've been hearing from sources close to AOC and Senator Bernie Sanders. Just this past weekend in LA, we did see a crowd of over 36,000. And of course, you might say, well, this is expected because this is Los Angeles. But last night, there was also a large venue that was filled with thousands of people, and this was in Utah. They've been in Idaho as well, and they're touching on Republican districts or swing districts. And so they're trying to prove a point here, and it's that in these swing districts, it's important to deliver the message. And there are also people who are pushing back against what's happening in D.C. In Kern County, again, with the immigration rates that occurred in January, it was also a pushback that many Border Patrol officials and immigration officials here received from conservative farmers who were pushing back and saying, don't mess with our workers because our workers here are essential in the production of agricultural goods for the rest of the country and for their international partners as well. So it's not only conservative people who are also paying attention to what's going on, but it's people who have a critical role in these cities.
All right, Nidia Cavazos live from Bakersfield, California for us. Thank you so much for joining us today. Zuckerberg is on the defense, the trial that could force the sale of one of the most popular social media apps when we come back right here on CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg on the stand today in a D.C. courtroom for a second round of testimony in a blockbuster antitrust trial to defend his social media company. The federal government alleges the Facebook parent company bought up competing apps to create a monopoly. Here now, CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. Kelly, what is Zuckerberg's argument to all this?
So the argument is basically, look, there are a lot of other apps that are out there, and Meta doesn't have a monopoly because it has to compete with apps like X and TikTok and YouTube. And that it's not the only game in town. And specifically what we have heard from Zuckerberg in yesterday and today's testimony, they're actually on a break for about another 9 minutes. They've got to eat lunch too. But basically what we've been hearing is, he said, look, all of these emails that you're presenting to me, the FTC has been actually reading out in the courtroom certain correspondence back and forth. He said that's from a very early time in the discussions about acquiring Instagram, that this was not something that was relevant when the actual decision was made. And he's also highlighting that without Meta and without Facebook, that Instagram might not have been the company that it is. That there was actually a lot of benefit and help and improvements that Meta was able to make to Instagram in the fact that they owned it. So certainly, I mean, we are nowhere close to done, Mugo. We're only on day 2. We've got quite a bit of testimony left from Zuckerberg as well as many others. But yeah, the argument is, hey, we're not a monopoly because consumers and businesses, they can go to other apps on your phone.
And I think the big question is, what exactly is at stake for Meta? What would it mean for this huge social media company to basically lose? If the FTC wins this case, what happens to them?
Well, it could be problematic. If the FTC wins this case, there could be a situation where Meta is forced to sell off Instagram and WhatsApp and basically break apart. Now, even if the FTC wins the case, there's a whole sentencing process, and that's just one of the options. But if that were to happen, that would meaningfully impact Meta's business model. It would also meaningfully potentially impact how you and I experience these apps, that sort of all of our ecosystem in the Meta world with Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp is connected right now. What would that mean for our experience, for data and privacy? And then I think the other thing is just that, what does this mean for every other mergers and acquisitions transaction that has taken place, that has gone through FTC approval? It's going to be interesting because the FTC is going to have to prove that Meta actually has a monopoly and that it has done harm to other businesses and consumers. The consumer piece is going to be a little bit tough because, you know, I can use this for free on Instagram.
Exactly. Okay, Kelly, I want to switch gears and ask you about this because major banks are reporting their first quarter earnings. What is the Bank of America CEO saying about consumer spending so far?
Brian Moynihan, Bank of America CEO, says they are still spending. And what we have heard from other banks is that consumers are spending, but that they may have been spending this past quarter to get ahead of the tariff deadline. So really sort of the data over the next few months is going to tell us whether that trend continues. We also heard from Moynihan that their analysts at Bank of America are not projecting a recession in the next 12 months, which I think was welcome news for everyone in the investor and business space. But he did admit that we are entering a time of potential slowdown and sort of turbulence in the economy. So not an incredibly dire picture, sort of a little bit middle of the road, Mugo.
Okay, we'll take it. We'll take that. And obviously today is April 15th. You know, it is the last day that people can file their taxes. Any tips for those people who chose to procrastinate and wait until the last minute?
I feel you. I did the same. Okay, 2 big tips. 1, if you are filing electronically, make sure that you hit submit and you give yourself a buffer, because everyone's going to be trying to do the same thing as you, all of us who did it last minute, and you just want to make sure that your submission can go through before the clock strikes midnight. And of course, if you are mailing it, make sure you get it postmarked by today and check when your local post office closes. The other thing would be, if you are filing for an extension, and a lot of folks have, know that that does not mean you get an extension on what you owe the IRS if you do owe them. So if you're able to estimate what you might know, pay that ahead of time, and then submit the paperwork afterwards, you won't have to pay interest, Mugo.
All right, all very good advice there. Kelly O'Grady, thank you so much for joining us on 24/7. China's President Xi Jinping makes his rounds in Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia this week in hopes to strengthen Southeast Asian economic ties. But as our foreign correspondent Anna Corin reports, it comes after Trump ordered that staggering 145% tariff on Chinese exports to the United States.
Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping is on the charm offensive this week as he travels through Southeast Asia trying to shore up trade partners and strengthen ties with countries that have also been rattled by President Trump's global trade war. He spent the past 2 days in Vietnam, where he met with Communist Party chief To Tam, as well as the country's president and prime minister, and signed 45 cooperation agreements, including a railway development. Well, President Xi came with a message that China was a reliable, stable partner and open for business. He also made it clear that Beijing would defend the international economic order. Well, according to state media, Xi said China and Vietnam should strengthen strategic resolve, jointly oppose unilateralism and bullying practices. Well, China, which has been hit with 145% tariffs, has invested billions of dollars into Southeast Asia, with companies setting up operations and factories in countries like Vietnam and Cambodia to skirt US tariffs. Vietnam was hit with 46% tariffs, but has been given a 90-day reprieve. Last week, the Deputy Prime Minister met with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, where they agreed to formally begin trade talks. But when asked about President Xi's trip to Southeast Asia, President Trump said they were trying to, quote, screw the United States. Well, Vietnam is one of the world's fastest growing economies and an emerging manufacturing powerhouse, and it's walking a very fine line. Nearly 1/3 of its exports go to the US, and while it is a communist country, in recent years it's had a very strong relationship with the United States. There is concern among Southeast Asian nations that an economic decoupling between the world's two largest countries could force these countries to pick sides. Well, Xi will spend the next few days in Malaysia and then travel to Cambodia. Ahead of the trip, he said that a trade war will produce no winners and protectionism will lead nowhere. Back to you.
Anna Corin, thank you. Let's take a live look now at the White House. Her Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, she just talked about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That is the Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. We'll bring you those comments ahead of his hearing today. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. A live look now inside the White House, where Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, she is in the podium right now taking questions from reporters. And of course, top of mind today, immigration policies, the administration looking into the possibility of sending U.S. criminals to El Salvador, a standoff at Harvard, and as we talk about all the time, tariffs. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand, she is live at the White House following all of this for us. She joins us once again on 24/7 this hour. And Natalie, you've been listening to that briefing. What can you tell us? What have you heard?
Yeah, Mugo, I should start by saying this briefing started a little bit later. So Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, still taking questions right now. As we are expecting, she's going to be getting a lot of them about this Maryland resident, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who has a big court hearing today. This is the case of the individual who the government, the administration, admits was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. She brought him up in some of her opening comments today. Let's take a listen.
On that note, the Democrat and media outrage over the deportation of Abrego Garcia, an MS-13 El Salvadorian illegal alien criminal who was hiding in Maryland, has been nothing short of despicable. Based on the sensationalism of many of the people in this room, you would think we deported a candidate for Father of the Year. That's because, unfortunately, many in this country care more about this quote-unquote Maryland father, a legal alien MS-13 gang member, than a Maryland mother and an American citizen who was brutally murdered at the hands of a different illegal alien. Of course, I am referring to Rachel Morin. And if you didn't see yesterday, a Maryland jury found illegal alien Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez guilty of murdering Rachel Morin in August of 2023. She was a 37.
You heard Caroline Levitt there refer to Abrego Garcia as a, quote, criminal, although, again, the administration has not provided the media or public with a lot of details about this. In court filings, there is a reference to allegations of ties to MS-13 by a confidential informant. But that's something that his family and attorney disputes. And keep in mind, Mugo, as we were discussing earlier, the Supreme Court has ruled that his release should be facilitated. Again, a lot to follow, continue to follow on this case later this afternoon. Now, Caroline Levitt, in her first question by a reporter in the room, was asked about the back and forth between the administration and Harvard University, Harvard rejecting conditions proposed by the administration, and that resulted in a more than $2 billion freeze in federal funding. Here's what she had to say on that topic.
Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense, in the basic principle that Jewish American students or students of any faith should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. And we unfortunately saw that illegal discrimination take place on the campus of Harvard. There are countless examples to prove it, particularly with the stunning confession by then Harvard President Claudine Gay, who said that bullying and harassment depended on the context. The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal law. So the president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. All the president is asking, don't break federal law, and then you can have your federal funding. I think the president is also begging a good question. More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
Want to mention that Harvard University put out a statement earlier saying regardless of which party is in power, no government should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. Now, before joining you, Mugo, Caroline Levitt was asked a question about the president's suggestion yesterday that U.S. citizens convicted of violent crimes could be potentially sent to El Salvadoran prisons. And she said that is something the president is looking into. She was asked, is that legal? Again, she reiterated this is something that the administration is potentially looking into, Mugo.
Okay, Madeline Brand, thank you so much for keeping an eye on that press briefing for us and helping us make sense of some of what's been discussed so far. And we will, of course, continue to pay attention to that White House press briefing happening right now. But when we come back, we're going to talk about a couple. You know, they break up. Oftentimes, they aren't only fighting over who gets the furniture or the house, but sometimes who gets fluffy. Hear from the dog lawyer taking on canine custody battles. And when the ground started shaking in Southern California, the instincts kicked in for these elephants, how they worked together to protect their young. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. A Boston lawyer is going to the dogs, specifically dog owners who are fighting over the custody of their canines. CBS News Boston reporter Logan Hall has the story.
When Brett Lyman went through a breakup years ago, he didn't have the typical who gets the house conversation. Instead, it was who gets the dog.
I just felt like he would be better off having both of us be there as an option.
For years, the couple amicably split time with their beloved Teddy, until one day when Brett's ex decided she was keeping their pup.
It's tough. Yeah, not realizing like that the last time I had dropped him off, that afterwards thinking, was that the last time I'm ever going to see him? And which is, I mean, I think for anyone, that's a difficult, it's not a fun feeling.
That's when Brett teamed up with Jeremy Cohen, Boston's dog lawyer. Yep, you heard that right. He specializes in pet companionship cases, even covers dog bite cases, arguing before a judge on behalf of owners. and their four-legged friends.
I gave my word essentially to my pet, my obligation that I'm going to care for him or her, my dog, cat, horse, and suddenly I'm not being able to do that. And people feel that the pet doesn't understand why. I don't want them to think I just abandoned them.
A breakup is never easy, and as crazy as it may sound, legal battles over who keeps a pet are much more common than you'd think. Jeremy now has a whole team of lawyers at his firm, all focusing on pet-related cases. In fact, it's a requirement that every employee is a pet owner. And as a dog dad himself, it's a cause that's close to his heart.
Oh, I don't smile that often, but I know it's a sincere smile when I can feel it right here. And boy, when you return a pet to the owner and they send you the video or you're there for it, or you get that decision from the court in the mail or online, it is a happy day.
After well over a year apart and a hard-fought legal battle, a judge ordered that Brett and his ex split time with Teddy 50-50. Jeremy was able to prove that Brett and his ex evenly split purchases, vet bills, and even care and attention. Now their tail-wagging, treat-sharing, belly-rubbing bond is stronger than ever.
We all have different things that are important to us, and for me, my dog's very important to me, and I care a lot. And so to be reunited with him was a big thing to me.
It was a reunification that any pet owner would understand. Best friends together at last.
And that was CBS News Boston reporter Logan Hall. Thanks for that story. There are no reports of major damage or injuries after a magnitude 5.2 quake hit Southern California yesterday. The first quake was centered in San Diego County, a couple miles from the town of Julian, and it was felt as far north as Los Angeles. The shaking sent people running for cover and knocked things over store shelves. Some people say they are still rattled from that jolt.
We have a large beam that runs through the center of our house, and I heard a cracking noise. And so my first instinct was to get out because I didn't want to be underneath that beam.
Aggressive shaking, and I started hearing all like the popping of the bottles hitting the ground.
Everyone and pets running too. And this is pretty incredible. Look at this. As the ground shook, a herd of African elephants at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, they did not hesitate to protect their young. When the quake hit yesterday morning, a camera in their enclosure started shaking, and that is when 3 of those older elephants, they huddled together, circling around 2 of their 7-year-old calves to protect them. They were inside that circle for several minutes while the older elephants kept watch. Zoo workers say this is called an alert circle. Elephants can actually feel sounds through their feet, and their instincts kick in to protect their herd. Zoo workers say the elephants briefly huddled together again when an aftershock hit. That's amazing. Okay, we have much more ahead here on CBS News 24/7. We are keeping an eye on the White House press briefing that is happening right now. And there is a hearing this afternoon for the Maryland father mistakenly deported to El Salvador. The judge is set to consider whether to hold the government in contempt. Plus, former President Joe Biden, he is returning to the national stage tonight in Chicago. So stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. Much more news ahead. Have a great day, everyone.